The dinner table was set with Mom's finest china, the kind she only brought out for special occasions. The smell of roasted chicken wafted through the air, making my mouth water. It should have been a pleasant family gathering, but the tension was palpable. "Dee, dear, you really should have made more of an effort with your appearance," Mom said, eyeing my casual outfit with disdain. "This is a special night." I forced a smile, ignoring the jab. "It smells delicious, Mom. Thank you for hosting us." Tom squeezed my hand under the table, his way of offering silent support. At least he was on my side, or so I thought. As we started eating, Mom launched into a monologue about the importance of family legacy and carrying on the family name. Her pointed glances in my direction made the subtext clear. My inability to have children was a constant source of disappointment. "Which is why," she continued, "we've been discussing some exciting changes for our family's future." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat and a knot formed in my stomach. This didn't sound good. "You see, Dee," Mom said, her voice sickly sweet, "while we love you dearly, the fact remains that you're unable to provide an heir. A great injustice, really, given how devoted Tom has been." I felt Tom tense beside me, but he remained silent. Anger and hurt bubbled up inside me as Mom's words sank in. "So, we've decided to welcome a new addition to the family. A younger, more fertile woman who can give us the grandchildren we so desperately desire." The room spun as I processed her words. A new wife for Tom? How could he betray me like this? "You can't be serious," I managed, my voice shaking. "Tom, tell her she's out of her mind." But Tom wouldn't meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on his plate. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. He was in on this twisted plan. "Don't look so shocked, dear," Mom said, her smile never wavering. "This was always the arrangement. You knew your role was temporary." Memories of our early days together flooded my mind. The promises of forever, the dreams we'd shared. All lies, it seemed. "How could you do this to me?" I asked Tom, fighting back tears. "After everything we've been through." He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of guilt and resignation. "I'm sorry, Dee, but my mother is right. We need an heir. It's for the good of the family." The betrayal cut deep, a knife twisting in my gut. In that moment, I saw my husband and mother-in-law for who they truly were: manipulative, selfish people who viewed me as disposable. As the shock gave way to anger, I made a decision. I would not go quietly. If they wanted a war, I would give them one they'd never forget. Pushing back from the table, I met Mom's cold stare with newfound resolve. "You haven't seen the last of me," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving my shattered dreams behind. But a new fire burned within me, a determination to fight for what was rightfully mine. They wanted an heir? Well, they were about to get more than they bargained for. A few days after the disastrous dinner, Mom called to invite me over for a casual gathering with some of the community women. I knew it was a trap, but I also saw an opportunity to start fighting back. As I walked into her immaculate living room, I was immediately surrounded by a group of well-dressed, gossiping ladies. Mom beamed at the center of it all, like a spider overseeing her web. "Ladies, you all know my dear daughter-in-law, Dee," she announced, gesturing for me to join her. "Come, let me properly introduce you." One by one, she paraded me in front of the women, each introduction laced with subtle digs about my age, my childlessness, my perceived inadequacies as a wife. The words stung, but I kept my composure, forcing a polite smile. "This is Marjorie, president of the gardening club. Isn't it a shame Dee has never shown an interest in cultivating life?" Mom said, with a pointed look. Marjorie gave me a pitying glance before turning away, whispering to her friend. It went on like that for what felt like an eternity, Mom's barbs growing sharper with each new acquaintance. Through it all, Tom lounged in the corner, nursing a drink and pointedly ignoring the spectacle. As the gathering wore on, I noticed a few of the women stealing sympathetic glances my way. Perhaps I had more allies than I realized. During a lull, I found myself beside Judith, an older woman known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue. "Don't pay her any mind, dear," she murmured, patting my arm. "We all know Lorraine's just bitter because her own daughter abandoned her years ago." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this juicy bit of information. Judith gave me a conspiratorial wink before moving on. Suddenly, the endless parade of introductions took on a new light. These women weren't just Mom's adoring sycophants. They were a wealth of knowledge about her deepest insecurities and darkest secrets. And with a few well-placed allies, I could start turning the tide. As the gathering finally wound down, I made a point of thanking Mom for her hospitality with a pointed smile. She narrowed her eyes, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "This isn't over, Dolores," she hissed under her breath. "Not by a long shot." "Wouldn't have it any other way," I replied coolly, already formulating my next move. On my way out, I caught Tom's eye for the briefest moment. His gaze was hollow, empty, as if he'd already checked out of our marriage long ago. Fine by me. The less he was involved, the easier it would be to dismantle his mother's twisted schemes from the inside out. As I drove away from Mom's house, I felt a newfound sense of determination. She might have won the battle, but the war was just beginning. With a few unexpected allies in my corner, I was ready to fight for my life and make her regret ever crossing me. A few days after the disastrous community gathering, Lorraine ambushed me with another cruel demand. "We need to schedule you for a fertility test," she announced over coffee, not even looking up from her magazine. I nearly choked on my drink. "Excuse me? Why on earth would I do that?" She fixed me with a steely gaze. "To prove once and for all whether you're capable of providing an heir. If the results are positive, perhaps we can revisit this ridiculous notion of bringing in another woman." The audacity of her request stunned me into silence. After everything they'd put me through, they still expected me to jump through hoops? I opened my mouth to protest, but Tom cut me off. "Just do it, Dee," he said flatly. "The sooner we get this settled, the better for everyone." His callous disregard for my feelings felt like a slap in the face. Didn't my husband have any loyalty left? Realizing I was outnumbered, I agreed to the test, if only to buy myself some time. The procedure itself was mercifully quick, but the waiting was agonizing. Each day that ticked by, I imagined Lorraine growing more smug, more convinced that I would fail this latest trial. I couldn't let her win, not this time. Finally, the call came. The doctor's tone was carefully neutral as she relayed the results. I was still fertile, very much capable of conceiving a child. An immense weight lifted from my shoulders, and for a fleeting moment I felt a glimmer of hope that this nightmare might actually end. That hope was swiftly extinguished when I shared the news with Lorraine and Tom. Rather than being pleased, or even relieved, Lorraine's expression remained cold and calculating. "Well, isn't that interesting?" she mused. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. These things have a way of working themselves out in the end." Tom said nothing, his face an inscrutable mask. In that moment, I realized with sickening clarity that the test had never been about giving me a fair chance. To them, I was an inconvenient obstacle to be disposed of, no matter what the results showed. Memories came flooding back of those early days with Tom, when we discussed having children of our own. I remembered the tenderness in his eyes, the excitement in his voice as he painted pictures of our future family. Now, it was as if that man had never existed, replaced by this hollow stranger who valued his mother's whims above all else. As Lorraine droned on about needing to explore other options, I tuned her out, my mind racing. For weeks, I'd been reactionary, constantly scrambling to counter her latest move. But no more. It was time to take control of the situation, to turn the tables on these two manipulators before they could do any more damage. I would play along for now, I decided, lulling them into a false sense of complacency. And then, when they least expected it, I would strike, exposing their deceit and hypocrisy for all to see. This time, I would be the one dictating the terms. Lorraine's voice finally broke through my reverie. "Are you listening, Dolores? We need to start interviewing potential surrogates immediately." I met her gaze, my expression carefully neutral. "Of course, whatever you think is best." The words tasted like acid, but I forced myself to smile. Let them believe they'd won, for now. Soon enough, they would realize they had underestimated me at their peril. This was no longer just a fight for my marriage. It was a battle for my dignity, my self-worth. And I didn't intend to lose. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, a sickening realization washed over me. This entire marriage had been a sham, a twisted game orchestrated by Lorraine, with Tom as her willing pawn. Memories came flooding back of our early days together, when we'd excitedly discussed our hopes and dreams for starting a family. I remembered Tom's tender reassurances that we had all the time in the world, that children would come when the moment was right. "We'll figure it out together, babe," he'd murmured, pulling me close. "No need to rush into anything." Now, in the harsh light of day, those words rang hollow, a carefully constructed lie designed to lure me into Lorraine's trap, because the truth was they'd never intended for me to be a permanent part of this family. The signs had been there all along, but I'd been too blinded by love and optimism to see them. Like the time Tom casually mentioned that his parents expected him to provide them with grandchildren, no matter what, or the way Lorraine had bristled at my reluctance to move into her home after our wedding. "It's just until we get on our feet," she'd said with a saccharine smile. "You don't mind a brief stint under my roof, do you, dear?" That brief stint had turned into years of walking on eggshells, enduring her endless critiques and power plays, all while Tom stood idly by, ceding more and more control to the woman who'd raised him. I should have run then, I realized, escaped before allowing myself to be slowly suffocated by their toxic dynamic. But some foolish part of me had clung to the belief that love could conquer all, that Tom would eventually grow a spine and stand up to his mother's manipulations. As I replayed our heated argument from earlier, any remaining doubts evaporated. Tom's callous admission that I was always meant to be a temporary solution, easily discarded once a more suitable option presented itself. It was a brutal awakening, exposing the true depths of his betrayal. White-hot anger surged through me, quickly followed by a wave of icy determination. If they thought I would simply slink away in disgrace, they had vastly underestimated me. I would stay and fight, unleashing a vengeance so exquisite, so utterly devastating, that they would have no choice but to rue the day they dared to cross me. Tom's meek compliance would be his undoing, the rope by which I hanged his pathetic dreams of legacy and inheritance. And Lorraine, that smug, domineering shrew, would find her world crumbling around her, victim to the same twisted machinations she'd so gleefully inflicted on me. A feral grin spread across my face as delicious scenarios began taking shape. This was no longer about salvaging some sliver of dignity. It was about complete and utter obliteration, leaving their selfish ambitions in ashes around them. Let them believe they'd won, I decided. Let them bask in their false sense of victory. Because soon enough, the tables would turn, and I would be the one dictating the terms of our little game. Closing my eyes, I could already envision their stunned, horrified expressions as the truth finally dawned. They wanted an heir to continue their precious legacy? Well, they were about to get far more than they bargained for. In the days that followed, Lorraine's campaign of emotional torture intensified. Everywhere I turned, she was there, chipping away at my self-worth with her snide remarks and undisguised looks of contempt. "Really, Dolores? You're going to wear that?" She'd eyeing my outfit with disdain. So frumpy. No wonder Tom's lost interest. I grit my teeth, determined not to rise to the bait. Losing my composure was exactly what she wanted. At first, Tom stayed out of it, content to let his mother do the heavy lifting when it came to demoralizing me. But soon enough, even he joined the fray, parroting Lorraine's insults about my inability to give him a child, my failure as a wife. "Maybe if you'd put in a bit more effort," he sneered one morning as I headed off to work, my sole refuge from the toxicity at home. Even there, I found no peace. Lorraine's constant demands that I contribute more financially to secure the family's future left me drained at the end of each day. I dutifully wrote a check for $1,000 every month, a sick feeling settling in my gut as I did. So this was my reward for years of loyal service, to be bled dry by the very people who claimed to care for me. The breaking point came when Lorraine announced, with fake sweetness, "The surrogates will be here this weekend for interviews. You'll want to be on your best behavior, Dolores." I could no longer hold my tongue. "Are you kidding me? After everything you've put me through, you expect me to just roll over for this?" Tom's eyes went wide, but Lorraine simply shrugged, unperturbed. "Well, I did give you a chance to do things the proper way, but you've made your choice clear." "My choice?" I sputtered, indignant rage bubbling up inside me. "When did I ever choose any of this? You two cowards dragged me into this nightmare against my will." In that moment, Tom should have spoken up, should have defended me as his wife. Instead, he shrank back, cowed by his mother's withering glare. "That's enough out of you," Lorraine said coolly. "Why don't you run along like a good girl? The adults need to discuss family matters." The derisive dismissal was like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth, fully prepared to unleash the torrent of hurt and anger that had been building up for months. But something stopped me. Suddenly, it all became clear. This was what Lorraine wanted. She thrived on confrontation, on exerting her dominance over me through sheer force of will. Any outburst on my part would only serve to feed her power trip. A strange sense of calm washed over me, and I felt the fight go out of me, at least for the moment. Straightening my shoulders, I met Lorraine's gaze steadily. "You know what?" "You're right," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm just going to step aside and let you two continue making decisions for this family. Seems to be working out so well for you both." Lorraine blinked, clearly thrown by my uncharacteristic acquiescence. But her smugness quickly returned. "Finally, she sees reason. I knew you'd come around eventually, dear." I didn't bother responding, turning on my heel and heading for the door. Let them think they'd beaten me. Let them revel in their hollow victory. Because in that moment, I knew the game had changed. No more reacting, no more falling into their twisted manipulations. From now on, I would be the one dictating the terms, and by the time I was done, they wouldn't know what hit them. I should have seen it coming, really. The signs were all there. Lorraine's increasingly smug demeanor, Tom's guilty silences whenever I tried to discuss our future. But when I walked through the front door that fateful evening, the harsh reality still hit me like a ton of bricks. There, perched on the living room sofa like she owned the place, was a young woman I'd never seen before. Sleek and polished, with an air of self-assurance that could only come from years of being catered to. This was her, I realized with sickening clarity, the usurper they'd handpicked to take my place. "Ah, Dolores, there you are," Lorraine said, rising to greet me with a saccharine smile. "Allow me to introduce Angela. She'll be joining our family shortly." The smug emphasis on those last few words left no doubt as to Angela's intended role. I felt bile rise in my throat as Tom shifted awkwardly beside the interloper, unable to meet my gaze. "You've got to be kidding me," I managed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Tom, please tell me this is some kind of sick joke." For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or the last vestiges of the man I'd fallen in love with. But then Lorraine stepped between us, her expression hardening. "Don't be so dramatic, Dolores. You knew this day was coming." She gestured dismissively in my direction. "She's getting on in years, and her condition makes her unsuitable for carrying on the family name. Isn't that right, dear?" Tom said nothing, his silence hanging heavy in the air. Anger and hurt welled up inside me, quickly segueing into a cold, bitter sense of resignation. After everything, he still couldn't find the courage to stand up for me, for our marriage. "You're despicable, both of you," I spat, glaring at Lorraine and the smirking Angela in turn. "Using people's lives like this, discarding them when they no longer serve your purposes. I don't know what's worse, your cruelty or your cowardice." Lorraine merely shrugged, unperturbed. "Strong words from someone in your precarious position, but I suppose that's to be expected." With a sickening lurch, I realized she was holding something in her hands, a manila envelope, no doubt containing the final insult they had prepared for me. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked warily, but I already knew the answer. "Well, we can't very well have you lingering about once Angela arrives, now can we?" Lorraine replied, her smile taking on a predatory edge. "These are the divorce papers, which will allow you to exit this family with a modicum of dignity intact, though I shudder to think how you'll get by without us." The room started to spin as she extended the envelope toward me. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading, the point of no return, where I would have to decide whether to go down swinging or slink away in disgrace. Part of me wanted to fight, to rage against the injustice of it all. But another, wearier part knew that there was no point in prolonging this toxic charade any further. Lorraine and Tom had made their decision, callously prioritizing their twisted idea of legacy over anything resembling basic human decency. So with a heavy heart and a lump in my throat, I reached out and took the envelope, already feeling the weight of my shattered dreams pressing down on me. "Don't worry, I'll be just fine without you," I said, mustering what little dignity I had left. In fact, I'd say the world just got a whole lot brighter. Lorraine's mocking laughter followed me out the door, but I didn't care. The papers were signed, the bridge burned, and as I drove away from that wretched house, I made a silent vow to myself. One day soon, they would regret ever underestimating me. For now, though, I needed to lick my wounds and chart a new course, one free from their toxic influence. But mark my words, vengeance would be mine. They wanted to cast me aside like some unwanted burden? Well, they were about to learn just how heavy that burden could become. In the aftermath of my brutal ousting from the family, I found myself adrift, reeling from the depths of Lorraine and Tom's betrayal, yet simultaneously liberated from their toxic grip. With nowhere else to turn, I did the only thing I could. I went home, back to the warm embrace of my parents and the life I'd left behind so many years ago. "That son of a bitch!" My father growled when I recounted the sordid tale, fists clenching with a rare burst of anger. "After everything you sacrificed for that family." Mom simply held me close, her gentle shushing the only balm for the ragged wound in my heart. In their cozy little ranch home, surrounded by decades of cherished memories, I finally felt safe enough to process the devastating turn my life had taken. But even as I grieved my shattered dreams, a newfound sense of determination took root. I was done being a victim, done letting Lorraine and her cronies dictate my worth. It was time to show them and myself what I was truly capable of when freed from their toxic influence. The first step, I decided, was to rebuild my financial security. While Tom and his mother had been content to bleed me dry, I'd been quietly squirreling away funds, investing in a passion project that had become my own little secret. With my parents' support, I threw myself into making that dream a reality. Months passed in a whirlwind of hard work and renewed purpose. Before I knew it, the dilapidated flower shop I'd bought on a whim had been transformed into a thriving business, its rustic charm and premium blooms drawing rave reviews from customers across the city. My own little oasis far removed from the suffocating world of Lorraine's making. Which was why, when the local news crew showed up to do a feel-good segment on the shop's success, I didn't hesitate to seize the opportunity. "Behind every flower there's a story," I said earnestly into the camera, carefully manicured hands caressing a vibrant red rose. A tale of resilience, of blossoming against all odds. That's what this place represents to me. A chance to start anew, to cultivate something truly beautiful out of even the most barren of circumstances. The words rang with authenticity, each one carrying the weight of my own hard-won rebirth. And later, as the segment aired to thousands of viewers across the city, I couldn't help but savor the delicious twist of fate it represented. Because there, I knew Lorraine and Tom would be watching, their own circumstances drastically diminished in the wake of my departure. And as the camera panned over the bustling shop, showcasing my hard-earned success in high definition, they would be forced to confront the harsh truth they'd tried so desperately to deny. I was not the failure they'd sought to discard. I was a woman reborn, thriving precisely because I'd had the courage to shed the shackles they tried to bind me with. And with my newfound power and self-assurance, I had no intention of fading back into meek obscurity. No, this was just the opening salvo, the first taste of the reckoning that was to come. Lorraine and Tom wanted to cast me aside like garbage? Fine. They were about to learn just how hazardous their precious legacy could be when it fell into the wrong hands. The game was just beginning, and this time, I held all the cards. It was the annual neighborhood block party, and the air was thick with the scent of charred burgers and cheap beer. Normally, this was the kind of event I avoided like the plague, too much forced socializing, too many prying eyes. But this year was different. This year, I had a point to prove. As I made my way through the crowd, heads turned and whispers rippled in my wake. News of my very public split from Tom and his venomous mother had spread like wildfire, no doubt fueled by their own twisted version of events. But I didn't care. Let them talk. Soon enough, they would be singing a very different tune. "Well, well, if it isn't the woman of the hour," a familiar voice rang out, dripping with disdain. I turned to find Lorraine bearing down on me, Tom skulking a few paces behind like a beaten dog. Angela was mercifully absent, though I had no illusions about her eventual appearance. "Lorraine," I replied coolly, refusing to be baited. "Lovely to see you out and about. Keeping busy, I trust?" She sneered at my nonchalant tone. "Don't play coy with me, Dolores. We both know you've been putting on quite the performance lately with your newfound success." The way she spat out that last word spoke volumes. To Lorraine, my independence was a personal affront, a threat to the natural order she'd worked so hard to maintain. Tom shifted uncomfortably beside her, his gaze flitting anywhere but my face. I almost felt sorry for the pathetic bastard. "If you're referring to my blossoming business ventures, I don't see how that's any of your concern," I said evenly. "But since you brought it up, things are going swimmingly. I'd offer you a bouquet, but I have a strict policy against fraternizing with snakes." A few nearby partygoers failed to stifle their laughter, emboldening me. Lorraine's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "That by prancing around with your little flower shop, putting on airs for the neighborhood, you've somehow bested me?" I shrugged unconcerned. "I don't think anything, Lorraine. I know I've won. Why else would you be standing here, so clearly threatened by my mere existence?" The barb hit its mark, and I could see the fury building behind her cold eyes. Good. Let her rage, let her spiral into the toxic pit of her own making. I was no longer afraid. "You arrogant little—" she began, but a warm hand on my arm stopped her in her tracks. It was Judith, bless her soul, flanked by a small cluster of the community ladies who'd borne witness to my humiliation all those months ago. "Is there a problem here, Dee?" she asked pointedly, her sharp gaze cutting into Lorraine. "Only we couldn't help but overhear this unpleasantness." Lorraine visibly bristled at the subtle rebuke, her mouth working furiously as she struggled to regain her composure. In that moment, it was clear. The tides had turned, and she was swiftly becoming the outcast in her own social circle. "No problem at all, Judith," I replied, squeezing her hand gratefully. "Lorraine was just reminiscing about old times. Weren't you, dear?" The sickly sweet endearment hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see Lorraine's hands curling into fists as she fought for control. This time, though, she remained silent, seemingly aware that any outburst would only further alienate her. "Well, isn't that nice?" Judith said, her tone making it abundantly clear that it was anything but. "Why don't you ladies run along, then? I'm sure Dee has much better things to do with her time." It was a blatant dismissal, and an utterly masterful one at that. As the cluster of women closed ranks around me, Lorraine could only gape impotently, her carefully cultivated facade of genteel superiority crumbling by the second. "This isn't over," she managed finally, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You mark my words, Dolores, you haven't seen the last of me." "I certainly hope not," I shot back, feeling emboldened by the support of my newfound allies. "Watching you unravel promises to be immensely satisfying." With that, I turned on my heel, leaving her to stew in her own bitter juices as I rejoined the party. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time, I held the higher ground. Lorraine's twisted legacy was already cracking at the seams, and I had no intention of letting up until it lay in ruins at my feet.